Welcome into another Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. No Alan Saunders today. So I don't know how we want to say. I don't know if when Alan's not here, if I'm the one driving, that's a very dangerous idea. If so, it's DB riding shotgun. I don't know if I should give him the wheel or what, but either way, DB filling in for Alan Saunders once again here on a Friday. DB, how we doing?
I'm good with riding shotgun, man. This is your all show. I'm just here so I don't get fined and to talk some Steelers football. So I'm excited about that. We are less than 2 weeks away from the NFL draft. I cannot
That's great.
believe we
Does
are
it
so
feel like it to
close.
you? There's something different about maybe it's just because I bought a house and like that's been where my
Yeah.
majority of my focus has been. I haven't like done as much with the draft as I typically do. I
Mhm.
don't feel like it feels like that time of year to me right now. I'm a little bit bummed out about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say things are pretty much status quo for me
Okay.
personally. I
All right.
uh
So
I
it is
did
just
take a break. I did take a break from watching safeties over the past like
nice.
24 hours to kind of
You probably
revert back.
weren't thinking you'd be having to watch as much safeties as
Yeah,
like
that
the
is
beginning
that
of this
is true.
process. You probably were like, I mean, just like the top players of the class, if you want to watch them just
Yeah.
because, and maybe like the Steelers would invest at some point, but like the interest they've shown, I feel like you've had to dive into them more than any other position.
Yeah, it's definitely been. I'm not going to get to everybody that I want to, but I definitely wanted to get a
Mhm.
thorough look at a lot of the bigger names, at least that they've been connected with. But yeah, I took a little bit of a break from that to get to some extra film on a certain quarterback that made a visit
Mhm.
yesterday to the South Side. So that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, for me, April is always just like with me having, a full time job doing this as well, I'm always,
Yeah.
cramming last minute. So April's always pretty busy for your boy.
Well, let's start with the QB thing because a little bit of breaking news right before we started recording here. Derek Carr has a shoulder injury, and there's really no timeline. Like he could opt to get this surgery. It sounds like his entire
Hmm.
season potentially in jeopardy, depending on the route that he and they choose to go. The New Orleans Saints picking at number 9 already could certainly make the case for them taking a quarterback in the first round, even with the inclusion of Derek Carr. If he's not going to be in the mix in 2025 now, man, you really got to think, okay, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, one of those two, certainly I think going to continue to be a heavy favorite to be mocked to the New Orleans Saints with 13 days to go.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. I've seen a lot of smoke about the Saints and a potential quarterback. They're an interesting one, right? Because it certainly seems like they were one of the last teams to hire a head coach, Kellen Moore.
Mhm.
I don't want to say like wasn't their first option, but it just seemed like that kind of fell into place late. And I just think that the way that the Saints roster is constructed, they're not a team that's like really close to being competitive again. I mean, it's pretty barren just from some of the decisions that the Saints have made financially, pushing cost into the future has finally like caught up with them. Some of their draft mistakes, trading draft picks away has caught up with them. So I don't know. They're an interesting one because I mean, you can definitely make the case that they should take a quarterback, I guess, because Derek Carr is only like a short term option. But at the same time, year one of a new regime, I don't necessarily know that they're going to feel. I mean, it's not like the Giants to where there's going to be additional pressure to get the guy
Yeah,
because this
right.
might be your last go around. Kellen Moore is going to have like several years to turn this thing around. I can't imagine that he took that job without the assurance that he's going to be given a kind of a lengthy leash. So it's definitely interesting.
No, I mean, a lot of good points made there, and that's kind of like the way that I've felt about it too. I don't know why they would like force the issue there,
Hmm.
especially like now because of this. Like, I actually saw a really good take about the idea of just like, hey, just roll with Spencer Rattler for a year, roll the cap
Sure.
space over from not having Derek Carr, obviously due to injury this year, have more cap space than I think the Saints have had my entire lifetime. Next off season, and really kickstarted at that point. Now, man, would that suck for Saints fans to basically have to just say we're throwing away the 2025 season, but I don't know what the
Hmm.
expectations were for them in 2025 anyway. So, but Jackson Dart has been honestly more popularly mocked there than Shedeur. Like Mel Kiper
Yeah.
Jr. vehemently has talked about the idea of Jackson Dart there and said he's not getting talked out of it like he did Bo Nix to Denver last year. Like he had that and then decided to change it at the last minute, got talked out of it, and then lo and behold, Bo Nix does go to Denver. So he seems to
Has
be pretty. Go ahead.
has Shadur even has he visited the Saints or anything like that? I've
I don't
only
know.
I've seen very little stuff, and I honestly I've been so busy that I'm not exactly
Listen,
searching out. other
Yep.
visits to
I
teams for
told you this
prospects.
process has been like a blur for me. Yes, if
Yeah.
Shedeur visited there, I have no idea. I just know I've visited Lowe's several times. Not
I feel that. Yeah, I
Shedeur
mean,
tried
that's interesting because I have seen. I'm kind of like you, like just on what I've seen. The little bit I've been able to scroll on Twitter, I have seen more Dart to the Saints more than I have
Mhm.
Shadur. But that
Yeah.
that could be totally off base. I'm not really sure where they would potentially go. For me, I'll just kind of revert back to what I said a minute ago, though. I don't definitely don't think the Saints are in a position to where they need to or necessarily should force a quarterback pick. Now, if you feel conviction on a guy, whether it's Dart, Sanders, whoever, definitely like you got to pull the trigger if that's Kellen's guy. I'm not sure that they're going to be a team that's going to pull the trigger in round one.
No, absolutely, and I think that kind of made the case for them to not do so. As far as Shedeur goes, before
Mhm,
we get into these questions, wanted your opinion on that. Obviously, haven't talked about it a ton. It's just so interesting to me because of where the Steelers are picking at 21, no second round picks. So you think like
mhm,
probably not going to want to trade up. I mean, if they feel that strongly about it, sure, they should absolutely be willing to part with future assets. But without the second round pick this year, it's harder to do so. At the same time, like a lot of guys, if like especially in Shadeur's position, a lot of guys would just be like, if you're not picking in the top 10, I'm not wasting my time coming to visit you. So
sure.
like I think from his perspective, like it feels like this is a possibility if he does get past 9 that this could happen. What's your take on the idea of Shedeur Sanders as a Steeler and just like Shedeur Sanders in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just since the combine, I think it's just become more public information that the NFL just didn't view or doesn't view Shadur from a broad picture standpoint, the way that I think the media previously perceived him as, like headed into the cycle, that there was going to be this
Oh yeah,
1
it's
2
like
quarterback
slam dunk.
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was gonna be this like 1-2 kind of quarterback competition between him and Cam Ward, and like that clearly wasn't what most NFL teams said. I mean,
Hmm.
I know of a couple teams that I've heard of that don't have Shadur as a like with a first round grade. That's the only thing that I will know, honestly. But as far as like, could he be available at 21? Like, I think that he could. Honestly, I've kind of floated around this idea as soon as I got back from Indy, where I got some of that information at the NFL Combine, and it seemed like a lot of people were just kind of writing that off, like, "Oh, there's no way." Of course, it only takes one team. Like again, like it only takes one team. Like
Hmm.
just because you go in the top five doesn't mean everybody viewed you as a top five prospect. It just means one team did, and it only takes one team to buy in to him as a player. But yeah, I mean,
And
there's
not
a
even
lot to like.
necessarily the team picking in that spot, right? Like, I think that's
Right,
it could
sure,
be, like look at Cleveland. They're not gonna take him at 2, but could they move back in ahead of the Steelers at 21?
sure,
Like, could they trade with Denver at 20 or something like that and still take him? So,
yeah,
I think, like, looking at the way that it's mapped out right now and saying, "Okay, there's nobody between 9 and 21 that would take him," is a little bit short-sighted because that's just, like,
hmm
brushing away the idea that somebody else should
for
trade in
sure.
front.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, we've all heard the stuff like from Diana Rossini, the Athletic, and just I think the common notion is just that this draft class is a little bit weaker, especially like at the top. There's not a lot of blue chip prospects. Towards the middle end of round one, and that like I would say for me personally, it's more about like in the 15 to 20 to 45, 50 range. A lot of those
Mhm.
prospects are like similarly graded. So you're going to have a lot of teams that are going to be interested in trading back. There just might not be enough teams interested in trading up. Now, the trade up scenarios probably involve a quarterback, right? And that would probably be for Sanders or maybe for Dart, depending on how a certain team feels about him. But yeah, I mean, I just think I went back when I did the quarterback rankings. I think full transparency. I really do believe that you have to watch like every single game of a quarterback to get a really perfect viewpoint of like what a player is. I don't have time to do that, especially this cycle. I'm not doing it like I did it in 2022. But I will say, like going back and watching a couple more games of Shadur, so I think I've watched like a half dozen. I mean, there are things like admirable traits that he brings to the table, like the
Mhm.
toughness, the accuracy to the short and intermediate area, just like the poise. Those things I think that, and there are some like really high level reps of like him reading different defense as well, especially like reading post snap rotations, cycling through his progressions, things like that. And just like even beyond like the accuracy, I feel like there's a difference between being like accurate, being precise. Shadur, like when his base is clean, he can step up into the pocket. he is a precise thrower. I mean, every ball, like, it doesn't hit the ground, it's hitting guys in stride. Now, I do think like there are some limitations in his game. Like, he's got some there's some scar tissue there, in my opinion, just from like playing behind that offensive line. He's got some bad pocket habits that are going to need to be worked out at the next level. And then the biggest question, I think, that's scaring a lot of teams from picking him maybe in the top 5, top 10, is just the ceiling. Like, what is the ceiling with his tools? Because, he was forced to create a lot in college, but that's not really going to be his game. He doesn't have the quick twitch or the speed to live on the edge like that in the league. And then also like just the overall arm strength. Like, he doesn't drive the ball with a ton of velocity, not a ton of RPM. So there's a lot of questions. But I would be lying. I went back and watched specifically the Colorado State game all the way through again. And that game in particular certainly like has me, even if he's not gonna, like, I didn't move him up or down in my rankings, I still feel pretty much the same way as I did about him before. But it certainly has me, like, my interest is peaked in terms of a fit with the Steelers.
So basically, we just need a bunch of trash to be talked by every opponent beforehand. That Colorado State game, there was a lot of stuff back and forth, and
Yeah.
after the game, like, he wouldn't shake the dude's hand, like, because he said
Yeah.
something to him on Instagram or whatever. But the other part about that I want to ask you about real quick before we do move on, because I don't want to spend. We
Mhm.
just spent 2 of the last 3 days talking about Shedeur.
Yeah, I remember
Was
that.
just your rankings. Where do you have Shedeur? Not obviously, I'm assuming
Yeah.
QB2, but like also just on a big board, where would you have him as in
Yeah,
terms of
so
overall?
full transparency, like, if you don't, not to belabor the Shedeur point, but I'm actually I'm finished with an article. It's going to go out tomorrow on SteelersNow.com. It's going to be like over 2,500 words. Like, there's clips involved and everything else. So if you want like my full thoughts
It's a
on
lot of
Sanders,
tweets.
like, yeah, if you want my full thoughts on Sanders, I would definitely check that out if you're interested. Like I said, it'll be out in the morning, Saturday. But in terms of like big board, like, he's not even a top 20 player for me, like, in the class.
So
So there
Allen
will
has
be,
him at like 15. I have him at 34. Kind of sounds like you're splitting
yeah,
the gap on
he's
that.
gonna finish more closer to where you have him rather than Allen. So, but
Okay.
that also is like one of those things where, positional need. Like, I kind of hinted at this, but picking him at 21 is different than trading up to go get him. Now, obviously, if an
Mhm.
organization has the conviction to do so, I'm just saying, like, me personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable like trading up for a player like this.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
and ideally, I think you would get him on day 2. It's just the reality of the situation with where the NFL landscape is. Everybody needs quarterbacks. We're desperate for them, and we're pushing other guys into the top round conversation this year, even. So, yeah, I mean, my interest is at least peaked, mainly just because I think that his evaluation, and one of the reasons I wanted to write so many words on it, is because, like, I feel like his evaluation is like one of the tougher ones I've done in recent years, just because of all the necessary context that goes into it. Um,
Mhm.
and I didn't even, like I said, it's over 2,500 words, and I didn't touch anything about like his personality or anything like that, because to me
Right.
it just doesn't really matter. Like, can you ball or not? And I think that I actually think some of the personality stuff actually is like part of what intrigues me to him as a player, because
Sure.
I kind of prefer my quarterbacks to be like overly confident and borderline like cocky and have that irrational confidence. And I think that you see that with the way that Sanders carries himself and the poise that he plays with.
Mhm.
So, yeah, yeah, it's very interesting. It's definitely one of the bigger storylines, I feel like, for the draft now.
So, I mean, this kind of just came about within this past week. Up to this point, 21, we've been talking about primarily defensive tackles, and that absolutely
Hmm.
still could be the direction that they go. So let's kind of pivot there, because Jordan wants to know, given that we finally had Harmon in for a visit today, curious as to where you would rank Harmon, Nolen, Grant. Who do you think is the best overall, and who do you think is the best fit for the Steelers?
Yeah. So I mean, Nick and I did the defensive tackle rankings, I think last week or the week before, on my YouTube channel.
Mhm.
I'm not surprised that Harmon came in for a visit. I really do. I think that there is a semi like realistic likelihood that Derek Carr is the top ranked defensive tackle in the class for the Steelers. Like,
Yeah.
I think he's probably
Yeah.
like number 1 on their
I
board.
actually said that. I mean, again, I don't want to make it seem like I got all the information in terms of
Hmm.
what's coming out of the Steelers but from the people that I've talked to, one person within the organization, a couple people that cover the team, I think that's the case. I think Derek Harmon is the number one defensive tackle on their board.
Yeah. So that does, if, and even if like you didn't like have the inside information that necessarily like you have, or anything like that, you could just like look at his build and see that like we don't have a lot
A
of
lot of
long
people talked
defensive
about that.
tackles in this class. Like he's a thicker guy. He cut a lot of weight when he transferred this past season to Oregon, got his body in better shape, and it led to like a really productive season. I mean, you look at the pressure numbers; they skyrocketed this past season. But he's just got the long arms and the build that I think traditionally the team has kind of gravitated towards, rather than some of these other guys.
Mhm.
So for me, if I'm trying to pick who the Steelers would probably gravitate towards, like it would be him. Now, for me
Mhm.
personally, Walter Nolen, I think is the best defensive tackle in the class. That's definitely against like consensus. But I just think I look at the burst, the lateral agility, the strength that he has. I just think it's a pretty rare combination. Super twitchy. He plays extremely hard. As a pass rusher, you see some like really, really high end flashes, even though he's still kind of figuring out how to rush the passer. Does have some moves, two hand swipe, cross chop, things like that. You can kind of match up Hunt with him a little bit. One of the situations that I brought up last week was, they were playing South Carolina, and they were ended up facing a top recruit at left tackle, but they kind of identified him as the weak spot. They kicked Nolen out to
Mhm.
the edge, and like he was giving this dude the work. I mean, some of the most violent reps that you'll see. There's times where like he'll legitimately like bench press guys backwards. Like there is still some refinement needed in terms of technique. He needs to play with better leverage. He needs to come off the ball more consistently in terms of like gaining momentum instead of standing straight up. He needs to time the snap count better. But like when it all comes together, which is admittedly sometimes only a couple times a game, he does things that I just don't think that anyone else in this class is really capable of doing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think the hands could be a little bit better. There's a lot of room for improvement. I would say and this has kind of just been the. I know we were kind of talking about this a little bit like before I hopped on, but one of the things I think is just like an unfair criticism of Nolen that I haven't really understood, and I've heard it from a lot of like a lot of smarter people than I am, like 100% in terms of like draft evaluators that I really respect, is just kind of this idea that he's this kind of project, like kind of idea type player or flash player. And like some of these other players are getting talked about like they're this like sure thing, can't miss
Right.
prospect. And I just don't think that that's really fair to Nolen,
Well,
because like you look at the numbers: 6.5 sacks, 14 tackles for loss, double digit pressure rate, 19.5%
mhm.
win rate on true pass sets, run stop rate almost 12%. All of those advanced metrics are on par or better than Mason Graham, and he had more backfield production. So it's just like it's just kind of weird to me that Graham, who I think is a really good player, like he's a first round player to me, and he was my interior defensive tackle too. I just think it's weird the conversation that's kind of sparked about Nolen. Is the production always as consistent? Does he dominate games like I think he's capable of? No, I don't. Not on a every snap or every game basis. But the production is still really good, man. And
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that's almost went like underrated in the process.
It kinda sounds like you don't agree with the notion that, like, because I think a red flag, at least from what I've seen people say, is,
Mhm.
like, the level, like, I don't wanna say taking place off, but it seems like a lot of
Mhm.
people seem to suggest that when talking about him.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if he gets dinged by people because, like, I've seen everybody tries to, like, pigeonhole these comps and make them a thing even when they're not
Yeah.
there. I've seen some people suggest, like, he could be a Jalen Carter type player, and because he hasn't turned into that, it almost feels like he's being dinged for being still a really good player, but feeling like maybe he hasn't hit that potential.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
Yeah.
I
And I
agree
think
with you though. Like, it's
Yeah,
odd to me.
it's really tough because I think that similar to Carter a little bit, there was some off the field stuff in terms of like maturity, work ethic, things like that. And I feel like people are almost projecting that to on the field. And a good example of this is like um, another person, a player in this class that's kind of gotten dinged and pushed down the boards for some off the field, like work ethic type of personality type stuff, is Luther Burden. Now, for me, like when I'm doing my grades, like I don't have the chance to meet with these players. I don't really. I try to like shield out like the outside noise as much as I can if it doesn't affect like what's on tape, because that's really how I'm trying to do my evaluations anyway. I'm not an NFL team, but like when you watch Luther Burton play, there's a bunch of plays off. Like he jogs off the line of scrimmage all the time. He quits on
Yeah,
routes
yeah.
all the time. There's a noticeable lack of detail in his game all the time. Now he's still insanely talented as well, but I have more of an ability to kind of take that into how I view him as a player because it's what's on the film. but that's not on the film with Nolen. I think that people are like kind of projecting that. He does run, he makes
Mhm.
all kinds of tackles away from his gap. He runs down plays from behind all the time. Now again, is the production, is it dominance from snap from whistle to whistle every single game? It's not. But I do think, from a traits perspective, he offers everything that you want to see. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty bullish on the player. I do acknowledge that, similar to Mason Graham, which is kind of like went untalked about almost. Mason Graham, for his build and the way that he's going to need to win in the NFL, he's going to need to be like an S tier athlete. Mason
Yeah.
Graham, fully healthy, chose not to test. Again, that's
Mhm.
whatever, but it is like it's part of the evaluation, and that's leaving teams kind of guessing in terms of like how athletic is he really to win with some of these limitations he has, like the shorter arms, the lack of power in his game, and then Walter Nolen. Like I even brought this up with Nick. As much as I really like him, I do think it's a red flag that he didn't test, because he does have the capacity to
Yeah.
boost his stock, right? Like we have all these question marks. We don't have a ton of blue chip players. You're a great athlete. Why not take care of your body, get yourself ready to test, try to boost your stock, get up into that top 10 range instead of, consistently
Absolutely.
letting all these people push you down the boards. And it's like one of those things where I kind of question, with some of the stuff I hear about, like his work ethic. Is he going to take care of his body? What's he going to be like when you give him all this money with the signing bonus, everything like that? Is if you can't really get yourself physically ready for like the biggest job interview of your life over the 3 4 months leading up to the combine or leading up to the draft, like, man, that's really disappointing to me.
Mhm.
And it's definitely a
Yeah.
leap of faith. Like he's going to be like one of those prospects that, we're going to look back on one way or another, I feel like.
Um, yeah, and but I feel pretty confident about saying the Steelers are one of the teams that were put off by his lack of what he
Yeah.
wanted to do, leading up through the process here. All right, real quick though, just to finish up that conversation before we dive into another player that you really like and somebody had a question about. So, okay, Nolen won. How would you rank the other two afterwards? Grant and
So
Harmon.
I had it Nolan Grant, or excuse me, I had it Nolan, Grant, and Harmon. Grant and Harmon
Okay.
are more like early second round players to me, but they will be like top 25 players on my big board. So kind of in the
Mhm.
range of where the Steelers are picking. That's just the reality of kind of this year's draft class. Not going to have a lot of first round grades. We just don't have a lot of like high end talent. The thing about Harmon, there's a lot to like with his game. Like I said, I think he's a really well rounded player. I think he's an easily projectable player to the next level. The one thing that I do worry a little bit about, I think he's stiff, in terms of like breaking down. Like he gets into the backfield all the time. I think he's a linear athlete that can create penetration and things like that. He can also like hold up the point of attack, which I like as well. But um, he just didn't finish plays at a very high level last season. Like that was really one of the differentiators between like a guy like him and Nolan for me. Is like you look at Harmon's missed tackle rate. I mean, 27%. It's just unbelievable. And I actually think that those numbers are pretty generous. Like when you actually watch him,
Mm.
because like he's in the backfield all the time. He just doesn't finish plays because like he doesn't break down and kind of change direction. Like he's not as laterally agile as like some of these other guys that are able to kind of secure tackles in the backfield. So one of the things I kind of wondered about with him is if he's going to be one of those like disruptive but not productive players. And I do still think like
Hmm.
in this class, that's still absolutely like a top 25 player. I just don't know like
Yeah.
what is the ceiling ever going to be there? Is he ever going to be a guy that's going to end up having like 7 8 sacks? And I realize that's like a high bar, but we are talking about like taking a guy with a top 20 pick. So I do think it's like worth
Mhm.
mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good player though.
The other player that I mentioned that you completely switching position here, but Matt said, so I listened to McShay's running back analysis yesterday. He dinged Caleb Johnson for having everything blocked up nicely for him a majority of the time. Wonder what you think about this and if that should factor into an evaluation.
Um, I mean, I'm curious about like what you think of this because I need to pull up some stats because
Well, I would
I
say
like
that this
McShay.
on the surface, that's not necessarily something that I think that you can ding the player for. Now, if you say like that happens, and then when it doesn't happen, you see the
Hmm.
results be like there's a negative impact when that's the result. But like that on its own to me isn't it's not a negative against Caleb Johnson. That's just more so. like presenting maybe there's a little bit of an unknown in terms of the vision and what he can do when it's not blocked so well. So I don't know, like I would be more so curious as to, okay, when that isn't there, is he able to create on his own when it's not blocked up nicely? Which I don't have that information in front of me as we sit here right now. I'm
Mhm.
sure there's a reason that McShay's saying that, but like going back and watching the player, I know people have talked about like the speed of Caleb Johnson. Is he fast enough? Like I think the game speed is plenty fast enough for him to succeed. I mean, he's my RB3 in a really good running back class, to let you know how I
Yeah.
feel about Caleb Johnson. So I think he's plenty fast enough. I think he's a really good scheme fit specifically for the Steelers.
Yeah.
I don't know. This isn't necessarily something that I would have came away from Caleb Johnson thinking, but again,
Yeah. I
McShay's
mean,
in the business for a reason.
yeah. I mean, I would say a couple things. I do think that Iowa's offensive line is really good. Like that. That is. I do feel like that is
Sure.
true. Now, I
Mhm.
didn't come away with, from Johnson's film ever thinking that like he was a product of like what was in front of him. And I think that one of the things that Johnson does is like he has this really innate feel and innate ability to kind of set up blockers at the first and second level. Whereas like most backs, when they're running like wide zone, the way you're reading it, gap to gap, things like that, like they can feel like first level defenders. But Johnson almost like has this feel for being able to see second level defenders and like set them up. So I almost feel like part of me thinks that Johnson made the offensive line just as good as the offensive line made him. And I also think that some of that is, not really reflected back into the numbers. Like you mentioned, like some of the people will talk about like, is he fast enough, the game speed, things like that. I mean, he had 28 runs of 15 or more yards last year. That was third in the class. Okay. Seems pretty good, right? Then you go look
Mhm.
at the yards at the contact numbers, 4.42 yards at the contact. Now, normally, like anytime like you get into the fours, that's when like we're talking about like typically guys that are going to go top 50, like the top 5 prospects at this position in the class. He was at 4.42. The only guys ahead of him are Ash and Genty, which is 5.25. I mean, Genty's going to go in the top 10, like one of the
Yeah.
best running back.
Yeah.
He's one of the best runners that I think I've ever evaluated. And then Damian Martinez, hashtag brand, most slept on prospect in the class. The one thing that I will say about Johnson that is a concern for me, it's probably the biggest concern that I have, is just he's a high cut runner. So like when there is penetration into the backfield, some of this is the scheme, but I did feel like sometimes when there was like early penetration in the backfield, he wasn't one of those guys that was able to kind of make something out of nothing, as well as some of these like short, twitchier guys that are a little bit more like make you miss in the backfield. That's just not really his game. His game is more like
Well, that kind
absorbing
of seems like that would
contact.
be where McShay's potentially coming from then, if that's
Yeah,
the case. Like,
yeah, I think that
yeah.
that's fair. I also think that it would be doing, and not saying he was doing this. I haven't seen the segment. I also think that it's doing him a disservice to say that he's like a product solely of the offensive line, because Johnson sees cutback lanes that other backs just don't. And I can
Mm.
confidently say that other backs don't, because I've watched over 20 of them in this class. This class is like ridiculously good too. And the fact that
Yeah.
I like the way like I break my scouting reports like down into like several different like categories for each position, he was the number one player for me in terms of vision. So that, I mean, that's just how I
Wow.
think
Yeah.
about like his processing speed and the way that he sees the game. So he's not gonna be for everybody. Like if personally, like if I was running like a really like gap scheme heavy rushing attack, like he wouldn't be one of the top 3 backs in the class that I would choose. But when you're talking about the Steelers that want to run a bunch of like wide zone, want to run a bunch of mid zone, like he's a tailor-made fit for what they need, especially in terms of like body type, being able to handle a significant amount of a workload. So yeah, I like Caleb Johnson, especially for the Steelers.
Last thing before we get out of here that I want to ask you. Well, I say that I want to ask you. Really, this comes from Isaac. Who are your favorite draft prospects for the Steelers? So this isn't necessarily just the round one question. Just in general, who do you feel like are some really good fits throughout the draft?
Oh man, um, Isaac put me on the spot. It's weird. I feel like in most classes, I usually have. I feel like maybe like 12 guys or something like that I'm really like bullish on. This year's been a little bit different in
Yeah.
terms of maybe it's just I've been so consumed with some of the day 3 guys recently, just trying to get through like my final rankings and stuff like that I can't really think. I mean, Johnson's a great fit for them. I've talked about like I think that Matthew Golden would be a really cool fit next to DK. Some of my other favorite like players in the draft are guys that the Steelers just haven't really shown a ton of interest in. Like guys that I'm higher on than consensus, like Colson Loveland from Michigan. That's been a guy that I've been higher on than consensus, although I feel like he's pretty high right now on big boards.
Yeah.
I just
How
mentioned my
high are
Walter
you if you're
Nolan.
higher than people?
I'm pretty high. I think
Top
right
12?
now. Oh yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
think right now he's at 6 for me. Yeah,
Wow.
I'm pretty high.
All right.
Yeah, I like Coastal Loveland quite a bit. And I kind of that was one that I just didn't move off of from summer. Like I feel like this class is unique as well because there's a lot of players that I watched over the summer, and I don't do like draft stuff full time because I do the Steelers stuff, but I do try to get to like the Blesto guys and the top 25, top 50, at least the guys that are in like mock drafts. I want to at least like see what they're about and see their skill sets. But I feel like a lot of the
Mhm.
guys that I watched over the summer just didn't have good seasons. Loveland didn't from a production standpoint, but then you turn on the film and it's pretty easy to understand why that was. They had
Yeah.
terrible
Yeah.
quarterback play. So, yeah, I'm pretty bullish on Loveland at the next level. I'm excited to see where he lands. But, yeah, I mean, I like Johnson, Golden. I've cooled a
It's
little bit
interesting.
on Azaria Thomas, but I still
Hmm.
am a believer. I'm not going to fold
Yeah.
completely on my stock there as well. So, um, I'm trying to think of some like other prospects. Let me go look and see what their top. Who are your guys? While I go look at their top
Well, I
30.
was to say it's interesting for me just specifically for the receivers because I think you
Yeah,
look at this two directions with like what do they need in that room right now as it stands, or do they need that George Pickens replacement in that type of receiver?
yeah,
Because if
for
that's
sure.
the question, like Trey Harris would be a great fit. Obviously, Jaden Higgins would be a great fit if you're talking about like for a year
Hmm.
down the road. Ty Felton from Maryland, if you have the time to develop him, I think would make sense. But if you're talking about like you need that guy in the room right now to complement or say like what they don't have, Jalen Noel,
Hmm.
I think, makes a ton of sense for what they could be looking for. Kyle Williams, who might be my favorite like route technician in the draft class, I think would make a ton of sense. Like the way that
Now, what
dude
are
gets
your thoughts?
open.
I want to hear your thoughts on Jalen Noel. What do you think of Jalen Noel?
I mean, I'm higher on him than I feel like a lot of. I'm not as high as Chris Sims. Was he having like wide receiver 4 or something like that?
Oh God,
Yeah, I got him at like 7 or 8 in the class, and it's not like a great receiver class to me. So that I
yeah,
mean, in most classes he's not like that high, but I mean, I would probably have him right there with his teammate, Jaden Higgins, and
yeah,
that's a guy that some people are trying to put in the first round.
yeah. Yeah, that one's a tough one. I feel like because there are some things that there are like I just said there's some draft evaluators that I really respect their opinions that are
Mhm.
a lot higher on Jalen Noel than I am, and we'll
I
see.
mean,
I
do
don't
you
know.
think did they change after the testing though? Like, you can't like completely
Yeah,
flip based. I mean, the testing was elite, like
yeah,
elite,
the
elite.
testing
But
was
like,
crazy.
I don't
Yeah,
think that can tell the entire story for it. I mean,
yeah, for sure. I mean,
although
like,
what I will say, like
yeah,
what we should appreciate for a guy that separates, in my opinion, well enough to like be the complement to these guys. What I think
hmm
he'll appreciate is the last guy that we had like that, Deontay Johnson. Unlike him, Jalen Noel was the 3.4 drop percentage last year, and everybody always talks about the Deontay Johnson drops and
yeah,
like that's kind of a trade off typically with guys that are elite separators, right? Like we just had this
yeah,
conversation on a podcast I was on yesterday about Dontavian Wicks because like I made this mock trade proposal with the Packers for George Pickens. We got to get a receiver back in the deal. It
hmm
was Dontavian Wicks in the 4th round pick. I don't,
yeah.
but
Yeah, I
anyway.
mean,
Yeah.
I think Noah is interesting. I think historically speaking, I have just always been, I would say over the past like 4 or 5 years, just really low on this like archetype of receiver. I think that Noel's interesting because I don't even know if I really see him as a Steelers fit with or without Pickens. Because I don't know. I tweeted this a couple months ago, but I think that Noel is just the guy that I think a lot of people wanted Roman Wilson to be last year, and the fact that like I do think that he's a better route runner than Roman was last year in terms of understanding how to set guys up at the top of the break. I do think he gets out of breaks more efficiently in terms of like decelerating, working back to the quarterback. I just think the route tree in general is a little bit more like expansive than the one that Wilson ran at Michigan. I
Yeah.
just don't really know what his role is going to be at the next level. Like one thing that I do really appreciate, it's probably my favorite thing about Noel, is I think he's the best in the class just at like you need somebody to run a bender or hit a hole shot in between two deep safeties. That dude is going to do it at full speed. He's going to clear out safeties. You're going to be able to work intermediate targets in behind him. I just kind of wonder what the fit is with that, because I think that the Steelers already have two guys that could do that. Like Calvin's pretty fast. He did that last year. I think that Roman Wilson could do that too. The deep crosser stuff. I think that
Mhm.
where I kind of differ a little bit with people is just like maybe the role in general, because he doesn't really have very many reps versus press. The ones that I saw weren't particularly great when guys were able to get their hands on him. I felt like he got really stuck. He's got short arms. I don't see like the quick twitch, like in and out stuff underneath. If I felt really comfortable with like his ability to kind of get open in like the 5 yard range, I would probably like agree with you where it's like you got these two vertical threats on the outside. Like, can he be that route runner in the slot? Other people seem to think that that is like something he's capable of. And maybe I'm just like underselling it for sure. He also just like isn't a threat after the catch. Like he's a guy that gets tackled on first contact consistently. So I don't know. It's really interesting. I do feel like I'm lower on him than the consensus, but I could see the Steelers like being interested just because like they've drafted, I feel like, so many guys like this recently.
Yeah, see, I guess that's the thing for me. Like, obviously, I don't think that they're going to write off Roman Wilson after one season, but like
Mm-hmm.
looking at him, I'm just looking at him as like a complete lottery ticket at this point. Like, if he ends up
Yeah,
being something great, but I wouldn't count on it. And then in the case
true.
of Calvin, I'm not saying that's like a guy that's going to break the bank on extension, but like, you got him, you only are guaranteed to have him for one more year.
Sure.
So, like,
Yeah.
who knows
And
what the
none of those
future
guys,
brings
like
there.
even
So,
yeah, and like none of those guys too, like the Calvins, the Romans, guys like that. Like those guys are good to have as like depth pieces and like supplementary options, but like they're not necessarily guys that are going to prevent you from drafting another player if you're really confident on them. So, um, yeah, I mean, I kind of I do like Noah better than I did Wilson last year, but I don't
mhm.
know. It is kind of interesting for sure to see what happens with that. But yeah, I haven't really put a ton of thought into, as crazy as it sounds. A lot of the prospects that I feel like I'm a little bit higher on this year are not really like Steelers targets, to be honest with you. I mentioned
Mhm.
Damian Martinez, like he's a guy that I don't think is getting a lot of love, and the Steelers haven't been linked to him at all. So
Kobe Bryant out of Kansas is another guy that I really like.
mhm.
Darian Porter kind of like, I don't know if they're going to draft a corner in that spot, but like certainly would fit the archetype that they've been targeting as of late in the draft. Um, yeah, those are some just listen, wide receivers and defensive backs. That's typical. That's my bread and butter in terms of finding
Yeah,
fits. And the
I will
obvious one
say
is one we talked about already in Derrick Harmon. Like a bunch of people have already made that like he's an
sure,
AFC
yeah.
North type player.
Yeah, I think everybody has that one down. I will
Yeah.
say this too. I actually going through the safeties. I will say that I I don't hate drafting a safety. I would probably prefer to do it on day two because I think the safety class is kind of legit. So if the Steelers did go that route and were able to somehow like get another second round pick or something like that, I think Xavier Watts can play. Andrew Makuba can really, really play. I worry a
Xavier
little bit
Watts is my
about.
favorite one. Yeah, out of
Yeah,
like,
Watts would be a guy that I think can do a lot of the deep safety stuff if you are kind of worried about like what Mika's trajectory is going to be moving forward. Makuba, I think that his transition to safety last year in Texas was absolutely awesome. He can run the alley. He has excellent zone instincts. He's a ball hawk playmaker. Same thing with Watts, like lots of ball production with him too. And then like even like a guy that's kind of been out of sight, out of mind, Kevin Winston for Penn State. He missed last year. He tore his
ooh,
ACL. But man, he's
the
like
way that he
his
tested after, yeah.
yeah, and his film 2 years ago is like, I mean, it's really good. The dude
Mhm.
never misses tackles.
They
Like
got
he
two
takes on.
safeties. I think Jalen Reed, like at
Yeah,
least like in the fourth roundish,
yeah,
probably a little bit later,
yeah.
would be a fit.
But Winston, man, like the way he takes on blocks, like the way he comes down
Mhm.
and fits the run, like again, like
Yeah,
he's one of those
you're
guys that
probably
just
getting a little bit
always.
of value because of the injury this year if you take him. Like I wonder
Yeah,
if he were to be a year removed from that injury, or to have obviously not gotten hurt at all.
right.
Yeah, yeah. So you're probably
I'm
getting
about to
value
look
on it.
and see where does yeah, like and this is like his rankings, not necessarily like I don't know where he's at on the consensus board, but Dane Brugler has him as the 83rd player in the class.
Yeah,
Um,
Pro Football Network's down at like 75, I think.
yes, I mean that's what you're talking about, like third round though. But like I don't know. I don't know if Winston's ever going to be, because safeties don't really go high in the draft in general. Like we don't really see a lot of like round one type safeties, and if you do, it's normally you're either like a freak athlete or just like you have an insane like turnover production. I don't know if Winston has
Freak athlete
the
Nick Manowar.
yeah, and I don't know if Winston has like the diagnose and the ball skills to ever be like a super playmaker. But I just think he's going to be such a good player, man. Like I think that he's one of those guys that I feel like it's such an easy translation to the league, and you're going to be really happy with him on your team every Sunday.
I think if he doesn't get hurt, he's probably an early day two. I think he'd be like in that Trevon Merritt range. You know what he
Yeah,
like
he's
30
gonna.
receptions, something
Just
like that.
full transparency. Like there are still guys that I have to watch, specifically on the offensive line, that are like on the consensus board higher than he is. But Winston is almost assuredly going to be a top 50 player for me. And like
Mhm.
I'm not really I don't have any like medical information. I'm not going off of anything like that. I'm just going off of
Yeah.
like what the 2023 film says, and the 2023 film is very very good. So
Sure.
yeah.
Excited for that. We'll see exactly where he comes in at. Look forward to all the stuff coming out over the coming days. Again, less than 2 weeks until the NFL draft. Oh, I saw a question about this, by the way. Got to see what Alan wants to do about like this channel. Last year, for my other podcast, I did Around the 412 live stream, and we just like also broadcasted it to this channel. If he wants to do that again, absolutely. But if not, I will be hosting for sure over on the Around the 412 channel a live draft stream with my co-host over there, Tyler. Some of our friends will be there for sure. DB will say that he's going to be willing to break his sobriety if we draft one specific player. I'm guessing last year it was Adonai Mitchell. If we would have drafted him, he would have been willing to break his sobriety.
Didn't break the sobriety.
But anyways, DB, until you get
happy.
that more work out there, be sure to tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, at Steelers_DB on Twitter and YouTube. You can find all my written work at SteelersNow.com. Like I said, Shedeur Sanders, if you want an in-depth look at him as a player, be sure to check that out on Saturday morning. I'm excited about that.
There we go. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you were here on YouTube. Hit us in the comments with your thoughts on anything that we talked about today, a question for a future episode, all that good stuff. If you're listening somewhere else, search Steelers Afternoon Drive. That's on Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast from. We are there. Do the same thing over on TikTok. Oh, and leave us a 5-star review and subscribe, by the way, while you're over there listening. Do the same thing on TikTok, and then you'll find me everywhere. Zachary Smith, PGH. For Derek, Bill, myself, thanks for jumping in. Take another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.